Hello everybody, once again I'm Thrash Maniac HD, back with episode number 2 of the Avenged Sevenfold Discography review series. And if you guys saw the last episode, I reviewed Sounding the Seventh Trumpet. Now we get to what was by some people the end of an era for Avenged Sevenfold. This was their last album in their metalcore era. When really this album I feel like was more just straightforward heavy metal than a metalcore album. But according to the description of the album, this album does definitely lean more towards heavy metal than hardcore. And I really don't hear much of a hardcore punk influence on this album at all. Not as much as it was on the first album. The first album was ground zero metalcore. But this album, to me, was a combination of thrash metal and heavy metal, and even a little tiny touch of melodic death metal. But they're not death. They're not a melodic death metal band by any means. But in a couple of songs on this album, I hear a little bit of a melodic death metal influence on a couple of songs, and I'll be getting to those later. But Waken the Fallen was their first official release on Hopeless Records. But the overall history with this album, this was the album that got a lot of people into this band and got the band a lot of media attention and a lot of major labels looking at them. And then eventually, after this album came out, they signed with Warner Brother Records, which was a good move on their part. But overall, with the album and the sound of the album, it kind of was like some people were kind of giving them some comparisons to Metallica and more apparent Iron Maiden. This album was definitely there was a lot of Iron Maiden influence. Then again, Iron Maiden's one of the top influences for Avenged Sevenfold. But we get to the album and we start off with a 1 minute 42 second song, the title track, Waken the Fallen, which had this like chanting kind of vibe going, which was like this weird chilly feeling you get. An interesting way to start an album like this. I thought it was an interesting opening song with the way it all came together and how it sounded with the ghoul kind of voices and chanting and stuff. I thought it was a really cool idea. But then we get into this next track, which was one of the first real singles the band ever had. The song Unholy Confessions. Oh, wow. An amazing song for the band. And this was also the first official music video that they ever put out for this song, which was basically a live performance shot from a studio club or something like that. And it featured a lot of fans doing cool stuff, like put like a bunch of Avenged Sevenfold logos on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and a lot of crazy fans and stuff like that. And yeah. But yeah, the song Unholy Confessions is an amazing song, a very good combination of some thrash metal and as well as Iron Maiden influence. And also note with this album vocally was a lot different from the first album. This album was half of like the screaming growly vocals and half clean singing, which really worked on this album. I mean, it was good balance. And this song was a great combo of that. Like, it had the intense screaming kind of growl, and even a little like a growl on a few parts, but it had some great, amazing, clean singing. I gotta say, M. Shadows is one of the best heavy metal vocalists of all time for me, because his voice is just so powerful and so good, and it's a good range he has. I know some people say it's like a nasally voice. I don't hear any like nasal kind of vibe with his voice really at all. But yeah, like I said, Unholy Confessions was an amazing song. But then we get to the song that was, funny enough, I heard this song the first time from playing I wish I had the case for it. It's upstairs, and I don't feel like getting it. But NASCAR Thunder 2004 for the PlayStation 2. That's one of my favorite NASCAR games, and that soundtrack was so good. And this next song, Chapter 4 by Avenged Sevenfold, was on there. And funny enough, this was the song that got me into the band in the beginning. And from that point on, I've been a big, diehard fan of them ever since. Not a fanboy, but a big, diehard fan. And the song Chapter 4 is a great song. A lot of excellent drum fills and just overall pounding rhythm. And excellent riffs. The whole album, just like the first album, had excellent riffs, although this album had a lot better riffs, more creative riffs, too. Despite, and another thing about Unholy Confessions, I heard some people actually thought they ripped off the song Spirit Crusher by Death, when in reality, they did not. I wish that argument would go away, and just people need to understand that they write what they want to write, and that's the way it is. And if you don't like it, then tough shit for you. But then we get to the fourth song, it's hard for me to really pronounce this correctly, but Reminiscence, I believe. I don't know if I completely destroyed it. I probably did. But Reminiscence was a fantastic song. I mean, every single song on this album is great. So this was a perfect one of their perfect albums from a top to bottom type of deal. Well, for me, every single one of their albums except for Hail to the King and the first album were perfect. Hail to the King had like one okay song, and Sounding the Seventh Trumpet had a couple of alright ones. But this album, like I said, yeah, every single song on this album is absolutely amazing. Reminiscence was a great song, and it had a little acoustic guitar, little parts in there. And I love how it transitions from the fast to the slow. And then it gets like in the real slow part with the riff. Dun, 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 dun. Like, I really like that riff. And then the clean vocals near the end was great. And then it ends with like this little double bass beat with the snare and the hi-hat, or the ride or crash, whichever one. And Matt doing like almost a death metal growl, going, and then doing a scream at the end. That was really cool. But then we get Desecrate Through Reverence, which was a great song. And the opening riff, or the opening riffs, were absolutely creative, really good. And this song had some speed to it. Also, this song, as well as Chapter 4, I believe Chapter 4 did, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe Reminiscence. I'd have to re-listen to the songs once again to understand, but Desecrate for Reverence was the first prime example of the guitar solos that were on this album. Had like about a quarter or half, in between a quarter and half of the album had guitar solos. But this was one of those songs that definitely had a solo in it, and it was a great solo. And now we get to the next song, Eternal Rest, which is another guitar solo, and it's in the beginning. And it's a ripping fast solo. The first 20 seconds was a ripping solo, and then after about 40 seconds of pure speed and intensity, and then it gets to the mid-tempo, that riff, that's one of my all-time favorite Avenged riffs. And this song had so much to offer, and it lived up to its delivery. I mean, it was very diverse with its tempos. It had some slow parts, some mid-tempo, and some very thrashy type of speed to it. But now we get to when I said earlier that a couple of songs had a melodic death metal influence in a way. First, Second Heartbeat, which is 7 minutes 1 second. So this is the third longest song on the album. And this was the first album where they really explored into doing long songs with a lot of elements to it. Second Heartbeat was one of the singles off of this album. And the reason I say it had melodic death metal influence is because of the guitar tuning they used on the song. This and the next two, but mostly this and the next song. More apparent on the next song, but this song, it was tuned down to the C tuning, which is commonly used in melodic death metal or melodic metalcore. It was actually a drop. It was drop C. It was like the whole. It was like D tuning, but the sixth string was tuned down to C, I believe. And this had a hell of a solo and just some good elements into it. It was mostly very fast for the most part, but this was a great song. But now we get to, in my opinion, the best song on the album and the most apparent melodic death metal kind of influence song, Radiant Eclipse, and probably my personal favorite Avenged Sevenfold song because of it. But even though this song doesn't have a solo, it didn't need it. It did not need a solo because the riffs. Well, technically, you can kind of consider like the beginning that a solo, like a simple solo. But then you get the riffs coming in, which were fantastic. But the screams, like the screamy vocals on this song, were very kind of influenced by bands like At the Gates and Dark Tranquillity and In Flames. Those very first melodic death metal bands where they did mostly screaming vocals. The vocals on this song were very influenced, very At the Gates, In Flames ish for me. Music, listening to it, it sounded a lot like it. But also you get the very good clean vocals on here, and I just love this song to death. This is my favorite Avenged Sevenfold song, in my personal opinion, the best song on this album. But now we get to two songs that are in two parts. One part's 9 minutes, which is the longest song, and then the second part is about 4 minutes 44 seconds. I Won't See You Tonight, which the first part was more of a very heavy. It had some heavy moments, but a power ballad per se that had melodic death metal sounds to it, despite the vocals being all clean. This was the only song on this album that was all clean vocals. Every other song was in that half and half range. But this song was all clean vocals, and this song was a very powerful vocal performance from M Shadows, and the riffs and that piano, the drums. And then with it leading into the second part, which sounds nothing like part one. Part one was the ballad. Part two, straight up heavy. Heavy as hell, although it had a part in it that carried over from the first part with the chorus in the middle to near the end of the song. But for the most part, this song was all heavy riffs. The beginning and the ending of part two was very thrash metal influenced. But now we get to the song that I felt was definitely the most Iron Maiden influenced song on this album, Clairvoyant Disease, which was a very powerful song. And for the most part, most of the song was mostly clean vocals. They only had a few moments of the screamy, growly vocals. But yeah, this had a solo, and actually, I Won't See You Tonight parts 1 and 2 had solos. So the tally is now at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 songs that have solos, and we're at the 11th song. So yeah, definitely half of the songs had solos. But Clairvoyant Disease was such a great song. Very powerful lyrics, powerful elements to a great solo, with a fantastic ending with the screaming vocals, and then the ending, and then back to like the melodic guitar sound at the end. But now we get to the epic ending, and all things will end. which is the second longest song on the album at 7 minutes 40 seconds. Really, really good song, a great song, and it had a really cool element to it. It was like the first 5 to 5.25 minutes of the song was all the same idea, but then you get to the last couple minutes where it slows down and it sounds melodic death metal-ish with the guitars, and then after about halfway through, then it starts fading out very, very slowly, which I thought was really, really trippy. But yeah, All Things Will End was a great song. Every single one of these songs were great in my opinion, although the best one, in my opinion, is Radiant Eclipse, and also I'm kind of saying that because it's my favorite song on the album and my favorite Avenged song ever. But overall, Waken the Fallen, one of their best albums, my personal favorite album because it was the album that got me into the band. Even though every song was great, I'm not going to give it an all-perfect score. Or actually, I will. I'll give it a 10 out of 10. Because this was the album, their last album on indie label. It had more clean vocals. And also, this was the first full album to feature Sinister Gates on guitar. And the first album to feature Johnny Christ on bass. So that way we have the classic lineup of M. Shadow, Zachy Vengeance, Sinister Gates, Johnny Christ, and Jimmy the Rev Sullivan. And this is the first album with that classic lineup. So yeah, I give this album a perfect 10 out of 10, and also this album got them a lot of buzz, and this was the album that got them to sign to Warner Brother Records. But anyways, that was episode 2. Episode 3, we get to what people consider their best album. And I'll say it is their best album. And it was an album that definitely launched the band to new heights. Next up, we talk about City of Evil. Peace.